When I moved into my house about 18 months ago, there was a streetlight outside my front window. It was perfectly positioned to light up the inside of my house every evening. Every evening for the last year and a half, it has been doing this. And then one evening, when I was sitting inside watching TV, I noticed that it wasn't blinking like it usually did. And so I thought, maybe it's broken, or maybe someone's hacked it or something. But it was still working, just not blinking. So I thought, you know what? I'll just report it and let them deal with it. I've got more important things to do than chase up a non-blinking streetlight. So I reported it, and then I forgot about it. 6 weeks later, I was still sitting in the same spot, watching the same program on the same channel, and the streetlight was still not blinking. So I thought, you know what? I really need to chase this up. If the council can't fix a simple blinking problem, how can they be trusted with anything more complex than that? So I called them up. And after an hour on hold, listening to the worst elevator music known to man, I finally got through to someone who could help me. So I explained my situation to her. I told her that the streetlight had stopped blinking. She asked me which street I lived on, and I told her. She then checked her computer screen and said, "I'm sorry, but we don't have any record of you reporting a faulty streetlight." I said, "I'm sorry, are you saying that I didn't report it?" She said, "I'm sorry, but our records show that no report was ever made." I sat down at that point because I knew I was going to faint otherwise. I managed to stammer out, but I did report it. But all she would say was, "I'm sorry, sir, but our records show that no report was ever made." I then tried to explain that my memory might not be accurate and that it might have happened before Christmas, but she cut me off mid-sentence and said, "I'm sorry, sir, but I'm going to have to end this call now," and then she hung up on me. I sat there for a few seconds trying to process what had just happened. Then I went downstairs to check if the light was still working. It was, and it was still not blinking. At that point, I felt two distinct emotions. The first was frustration that this stupid light wasn't blinking, and the second was anger that I'd been hung up on by some overpaid council worker who clearly didn't have enough work to do. And so I decided that I was going to make that light blink. I was going to make it blink so hard that it would put those lazy, overpaid council workers to shame. Now, you might be wondering why I care so much about whether the light blinks or not. And to be honest, I don't. I mean, does it really matter if the streetlight outside my house blinks or not? No, but it's the principle of the thing. It's the fact that the council has failed to do something that I asked them to do, and I just couldn't let it go. You see, I've always been like this. When I was young, I used to get really angry when people would call me names or make fun of me, and I would spend hours trying to come up with the perfect comeback. Sometimes I would even go home and write down all the different things I could have said, and then read them out loud to see how they sounded. Of course, by the time I'd finished writing everything down, the opportunity to use any of them would have passed, but that didn't matter. It was all about the principle. I've also been like this with inanimate objects. When I was at school, there was a vending machine that would often eat my lunch money without giving me my lunch. Now, I don't know if this was because the machine was faulty or because my fingers were too small to work the buttons properly. But it always seemed to happen right before dinner time, which meant that I would go to lunch with no money and no food. To this day, I still haven't worked out how to beat a vending machine. And so whenever I saw that vending machine, I would swear at it and try to stick my fingers in every hole on the machine to see if I could break it. Of course, I never did manage to break it, but I did break a few fingernails. So when the streetlight outside my house stopped blinking, I felt a burning desire to fix it. And I knew that the only way to do that was to hack it. I wanted to hack it so badly that I was willing to risk electrocuting myself. After all, I'm not an electrician, I'm a writer. All I know about electricity is that it's dangerous. And yet here I was, planning to hack a live streetlight just to make it blink. First, though, I needed to find out what kind of light bulb it was. So I went online and did some research. I discovered that most streetlights use one of 3 different types of bulbs, each of which could be controlled in a slightly different way. I then climbed onto a ladder and looked at my light bulb. It was one of the easy ones, which meant that I could control it using a 12-volt power supply. Next, I needed to figure out where I could get a 12-volt power supply from. I checked online and found that I could buy one from an electronics store. It would cost me $30, and it would take a few days to arrive. In the meantime, though, I could start wiring up the rest of the circuit. I bought some wire, a socket, a plug, and a switch from an electronics store. Then I went home and started putting it all together. Wired up the socket, plugged in the power supply, and then ran the wire up the side of the house to the streetlight. It took me a few attempts to get it right, but eventually I figured out how to connect the wires to the light bulb. It was at this point that I should have tested the circuit to make sure it was safe, but I didn't. Instead, I connected the red wire to the positive terminal and the black wire to the negative terminal, and then turned on the power. The light bulb didn't blink. I double-checked everything, but it still didn't work. That's when I decided to bypass the switch and connect the two wires directly to each other. As soon as I did that, the light bulb started blinking. I stood there for a few seconds watching it, thinking, wow, I've actually done it. I've made the stupid light blink. At that point, I should have disconnected the circuit and waited for my proper power supply to arrive, but I didn't. Instead, I left it like that for a few days while I waited for the part to arrive. One evening, though, as I was sitting inside watching TV, I noticed that the light had stopped blinking again. I went downstairs to check it, and sure enough, it was flashing erratically. It was at that point that I realized I had made a terrible mistake. The reason the light wasn't blinking properly was because I hadn't installed a capacitor. A capacitor is a device that stores electrical energy. And in a circuit like this, it prevents the voltage from dropping too low, which causes the bulb to flicker. I had installed one when I'd wired everything up initially, but I removed it when I'd bypassed the switch. Of course, I could have just put the capacitor back in, but I didn't. Instead, I went online and ordered a new light bulb. It took a few days to arrive, but in the meantime, I spent some time researching how to install it properly. I watched videos, read forums, and spoke to electricians. And eventually I felt confident enough to give it a go. On the day the new bulb arrived, I disconnected the circuit and replaced the old bulb with the new one. Then I reconnected the circuit and flipped the switch. The light blinked once, and then it started blinking continuously. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to work out what I'd done wrong. And then I realized that I'd connected the wires to the wrong terminals on the socket. Of course, this wasn't ideal, but it did at least mean that the light was working, so I decided to leave it like that. I continued to monitor the light over the next few days, and it seemed to be working properly, which meant that my mission was complete. I had successfully hacked a streetlight to make it blink. And although it wasn't the prettiest or most efficient solution, it was effective. In the end, it didn't even matter that the light was on blinking, because the council came and fixed it a few weeks later. But that didn't stop me from keeping it blinking. After all, it was the principle of the thing.